Good morning. My name is Michael Lewis, and I'm here with the Hilton Head MLK Committee for Justice. And I would like to introduce a very special person, Kathy McCullen, and she is with the Diversity Council of the Low Country, and she's been active in the community for a number of years dealing with voting. Kathy, please tell us about your work and why you're so passionate about voting.
Good morning, Michael, and thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here today and to be a part of this wonderful celebration. I'm an old white lady, but I've been a social justice warrior for as long as I can remember. I walked picket lines, I protested, I did all of it. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and so it's been something that's been very important to me. I started in politics fairly young, even with my parents, but the bottom line is that when I started going door to door and talking to people, it just brought home the importance of voting. When I would go to African American communities and talk to some of these people who were walking with Martin Luther King, who were actually walking with John Lewis and doing the important work that got us the Civil Rights Act in 1964. And the bottom line is that voting is a responsibility for every single American who can vote. And we have to take that responsibility. And it's very important to me, and it's very important to me to every day remind people of how important it is and what it can do to make their lives better if they elect people and bring people to power who actually listen to their needs and can make their lives better. We're looking, as Raphael Warnock said, and he is, it's so exciting. Today's such an exciting day. Georgia just elected the first black senator to the Georgia, to represent Georgia. I'm just so incredibly excited about that. And of course, Reverend Warnock was the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. He follows in Martin Luther King's footsteps. And so we can elect, as he said, not politicians, but public servants. And I want to be a part of that. And that's why after I ran for election twice and lost here in South Carolina, it's a challenge, but we'll work on it. And I went door to door and talked to thousands of people, and what I found out is that, there are a lot of people who are underrepresented, unrepresented. There are people whose voices are not heard, particularly the working poor, 21 million of them in the country, that don't vote because they feel like nobody cares about them. But they're starting to see that they need to vote, that power, their superpower, is voting.
Kathy, what do you say to people who feel that their vote won't make a difference?
Well, Michael, that's a good follow-up question to just what I was talking about how important your vote is. 81 million people voted for President Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, now the first woman and first black woman in the White House. It's just a very exciting time. So the bottom line is these 81 million votes were one vote at a time. I mean, everybody had to get out and vote for us to get that number. And we have to remember that every vote does count because we can't get to those numbers unless you get out and you exercise your right to vote. I've talked to so many people that still feel disenfranchised, and some, especially people in more diverse communities, that don't even want to talk to me. I don't want to vote. I'm not going to vote. It doesn't matter. But that's the problem. The more you say that it doesn't matter, you stay home, and what happens is the people that go out there and vote elect folks that are not going to represent your interests. So we need to understand that one vote, every vote, does count. We need to keep reminding people of that and telling them the stories of how it can make a difference. Back in the early days when African American men got the vote, before women even had the vote, a lot of black men were elected to office. And that's when we got the Jim Crow laws and we got all those things to try and suppress the vote. And that's what's happened over these last 150 years. So we really have to go back and say, we're going to take our power back. We have that power. Georgia is showing that you can do it, and we can do it too here in South Carolina.
What do you feel prompted the high voter turnout for the presidential election?
Well, Michael, that's an interesting question, and I think the pundits are going to be talking about that for years to come. But the bottom line here is there are a lot of people who did believe in President Trump and what he was doing, and they came out to vote for him. And then there were a lot of other people who were motivated to vote for a number of reasons, not the least of which were the protests and the social justice warriors that are out again now because of what happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others. That motivated people to get out and say, you know, we need different leadership. If we're going to change the way the police function, the way police departments look at people and racially profile people, if we're going to change that, we need to change our leaders. And I think that people have started to understand that, and I think more diverse people got out to vote because of that. There are a lot of other reasons, but I think, people got motivated because there was such strong divisiveness, there was so strong feelings about one party or the other. I think the divisiveness is problematic, and I'm hoping that with the new leadership that's coming in for this country, that will change. But the bottom line is there were a lot of things that motivated people this time. Of course, the coronavirus was another thing that motivated people, the fact that it was not handled the way people thought it should be. And today, we reached another horrible milestone. We had the most deaths today in our country. We broke another record from the coronavirus. So hopefully with this vaccine, with new leadership, we can change the direction of this country, go in a more positive direction. And I think there are a lot of people that felt like we were going toward a future that was not something that it took their needs into account. So I think that's what brought us to the historic number of votes this presidential election.
Kathy, with so much focus on the presidential election, how do you feel about local elections, and why are they as important as well?
Sorry if I'm squinting a little bit. It's a beautiful sunny day here on Hilton Head. And Michael, it's really interesting when you talk about local elections, because you know that I ran for election twice in local. I ran for county council as a Democrat, and I ran for the town council. Lost both elections, but during that time talked to about 3,000 people going door to door, seeing how their voices are not being heard. They don't have a seat at the table. It's very important in local elections because the things that happen with our local government are going to directly affect the people in our community. So if you don't have a seat at the table, if you don't have somebody voicing your concerns, then you're not going to get your needs met. And the bottom line is, with all of these local elections, they're sometimes won by 5 votes, 10 votes, 20 votes. So if you think your 1 vote doesn't count, your 1 vote, your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 votes can make the difference in a win or a loss for a candidate that might actually do the things that you need to have done in this community to make it a better and safer place for you to live.
What are your concerns about the trustworthiness of the election process in light of many of the concerns that came up during this past election period?
Well, as an American, I believe in our democracy, and I've always trusted the voting process. I always have. I didn't think much about it until more recently when people talked about some of the things that could go wrong. Unfortunately, though, I don't think that happened this time, and I don't think it's happened much in the past either. I mean, the bottom line is, there are going to be a little bit of mistakes made, and some things are going to happen, that some people might vote that shouldn't have. But that's so rare. And, over and over again, we see that. So the claims that have been made by Donald Trump about the trustworthiness of the election are just baseless. And we see that with 60 different lawsuits that have been dismissed. We've had recount after recount. And the bottom line is, I do trust the system. I do fear voter suppression, and I think that has happened, and I think it continues to happen. And I think we need a new Voting Rights Act to protect us against that happening. I also do fear interference in our elections from foreign governments. We've seen what can happen. We've seen recently what has happened with Russia and how they have hacked into so many things. So that does concern me, and we do have to make sure that that doesn't happen. But so far, I do believe that except for very few exceptions, I believe that we can trust the results of our elections. We can have faith in the fact that our vote counts and every vote counts.
Kathy, tell us, what changes would you like to see made in our political system?
Well, I've already talked about the Voting Rights Act, which I do believe is essential for the future of our free and safe elections. But I also believe that we need a couple of other things. There are two of them. The first is I think we need term limits. I think we need to get people out of power who are so entrenched, regardless of party, whatever. They need to move on. We need to have more progress with different people, with more diverse people. And I really think that term limits would make a difference, because people would get into office and they would just serve. And once they were done, they would go home and they'd go back to their jobs. That was the intent of the founders, if you remember. They talked people into coming in and do public service for a while and then going back to their farms and going back to the things they were doing. So I do think that term limits would be excellent, because people wouldn't be so worried about their next election and whether or not what they do is going to get them reelected. They should be thinking about what's best for their constituents and what's best for the people of this country. So I think that would help. The other thing I think would be, another thing that would help, and I don't know that it's going to ever happen, is public financing of campaigns. Billions of dollars are spent on these campaigns, which when I think about it, I think about people who don't have enough to eat, and all these billions of dollars being spent. It just boggles my mind. But also what happens is people become beholden to the people that give them money. And I don't want to see that happen. I don't want people to feel that way when they go into office. I want them to just do the right thing. And if we had publicly financed campaigns and term limits, people would do that. They would serve the public during the time that they were in there, and that they wouldn't be just thinking about their next election.
In what ways have you been inspired by the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King?
Oh, Michael, you mentioned Dr. King, and I was just thinking this morning that it must be happy hour in heaven for Dr. King and the social justice warriors today because of Raphael Warnock's victory in Georgia. You know, Dr. King was one who knew that we had to make change. He knew it would be difficult. He took the risk. He realized he was risking his life. But what he also did was he only did peaceful protests, civil disobedience, things that he knew could make a difference without being so angry that we devolved into violence. And that's what I loved about what he did. You know, he kept going, and it didn't matter. And when he walked across with John Lewis, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and they walked across and they got beaten, and the bottom line is, this was the type of protest that we need. We don't want to get out there and be hurting each other. We need to come together. And he did that, and he gave people hope. And I remember, because I was alive, and I remember the I Have a Dream speech. And it was so beautiful and so moving. He moved people. He gave them, gave them inspiration. And we have people like that today. John Lewis was one of them, and we need more of them. We need to continue his work, and we need to do it in a way that gets us to the place we need to be without harming one another, harming property. Just let's get out there and make this work.
Can you please tell us about your reaction to the passing of John Lewis this year?
It reminded me of something that happened a number of years ago when I was campaigning in 1992 in California, and I was in a middle-class African-American neighborhood, and I knocked on the door, and I never forgot this, and an older African-American gentleman invited me in for tea, for iced tea, and we sat and we talked, and he was in his 70s, and at that point he was telling me about the fight for civil rights back in the 60s, because he was very involved. And he said to me, and the first thing he said to me was, "I've never missed a vote. We fought and died for that." And John Lewis was the epitome of that. I mean, and I reminded people, when we went out there and, with the Diversity Council that we started, after the 2 elections I lost, we had talked about starting, a Low Country Diversity Council to try and inspire people to get out and vote, to have more diverse people run for office, women and people in diverse communities, mentor people so that they can, be public servants. And, John Lewis was an inspiration to all those folks. And, we talked about how, he didn't care. He knew he might die. But it didn't matter. He knew he was dying for something that meant change, that meant something really important for the people of this country. And I can't tell you how much I respect the people that put their lives on the line, John Lewis being one of the best of them.
Kathy, I have one more question. Dr. King stated, "We have also come to this hollow spot to remind America of the fear urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take a tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy." What does this statement mean to you?
So Michael, you know I worked in civil rights for years in the federal government, and you know I was a public defender in Los Angeles County and Compton. I worked with a lot of folks, and you know when I think about what this meant, I read it over a couple of times just so make sure I understood it. And what it means is we can't just sit back and take some time to think about whether we should right or wrong. The bottom line is we right or wrong, and we do it now. I keep saying the bottom line, something that, but it is. We right or wrong. This is all it is. This is not the right thing. We need to have liberty and justice for all, not just for some. And what he's saying is we can't take time to think about it. We have to say that this is the right thing and we need to do it. And we need laws to make sure that this happens, so that it's not just something, not just a lovely thought, that it's something that actually happens and is enforceable as we go forward to the future. So I want to thank you, Michael, for having me today. I really feel privileged and honored that I was asked to be here and be a part of this exciting celebration. It's been an interesting year, but you know, when I look at what's happened with Kamala Harris and Reverend Warnock, it's just very exciting, and I think that it gives me hope. There are times this year where I will tell you, I got very discouraged. I wondered if our democracy was going to survive, but I think that it will. And I think with the people like you and people at the MLK Committee for Justice and the Low Country Diversity Council and every other group, I think that we can actually make this happen, make it better, make a better world, and have public servants rather than politicians serving us in Washington. Thank you.